Hello, everyone. I'm Keeman Kim, a second year MDiv student.
And I'm Dorcas Iwudzi, also a second year MDiv student.
And I'm Nicole Jascoot. You guessed it, a second year MDiv student. We hope you are well wherever and whenever this is for you. So, as we get into this chapter in Beal's book called New Worlds of Gods and Monsters, I have to say that one of my pet peeves is when people take comments or bits of stories out of context and run with their own agendas. We see it all the time in news and media and occasionally in sermons. Well, people's reaction to the book of Revelation is often no better. As Beal says, little story shaped images, apocalyptic shards, are pulled out of the text and cast into all kinds of situations and contexts. For example, the Whore of Babylon has been linked with the likes of Hillary Clinton or Michelle Obama, while the numeric value of the Antichrist name has been linked to Adolf Hitler or Ronald Reagan. For my part, I wonder how all this got started in the first place.
Nicole, I hear you. While others take bits and pieces of Revelation out of context, it seems as though John has taken bits and pieces from other sources to use as part of his vision in the book of Revelation. One cannot help but be perturbed by the continuous use of monsters by John. It has come to be known as the monsters John described in Revelation did not just appear from anywhere. Neither are they a fiction of his own imagination, with no point of reference. They derive their source from the past Jewish prophetic texts and other ancient mythospheres. The leading amongst them is John's great red dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, as can be seen in Revelations 22. It bears resemblance to the Hebrew biblical chaos monsters, Leviathan, and the sea monster Tannim in Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Psalm 74, where we have such references, all of which get translated as Draken in Greek. Other versions include Hydra of Greek mythology, who was slain by Hercules, Python, who threatened Apollo, the ancient Canaanite chaos gods, Yam, and the seven-headed Latan, that is also Leviathan in Hebrew. The diabolical dragon seems to have evolved in most cases, finding itself in the legend of St. George, that's in the 6th century, like the encounter with Michael in Revelations 12, and in the Old English poem Beowulf, as the abysmal fire-breathing earth dragon, that is also called the worm or serpent, that causes destruction. All these depictions of chaos monsters makes clear their ancestry from Revelation, as John makes his monsters from other monsters too. Their function as chaos monsters is to threaten the divinely blessed social and cosmic order of creation.
Yeah, Dorcas, and doesn't stop there either. There were later even more traditions of which non-Western gods were also turned into monsters that were thought to be related to revelations. Many of these narratives came from travelers of East and South Asia, and for example, we have Marco Polo, who describes seeing huge, voracious dragons of the Karajan region in China, which were depicted with huge wings and serpent heads at the end of their tails, which is reminiscent of Revelations chapter 12 and 9. We also have someone like Odoric of Pordenone, a Franciscan monk and missionary who detailed his trips in Asia, where he apparently discovered a corpse strewn perilous valley where a winged devil dwelled and that held all of these people's souls captive. However, there is the conjecture that this could have simply been a colossal statue of Buddha. And this section of the book called Here Be Dragons simply gives us more examples in which we have turned unfamiliar beings into monsters of revelations.
Wow. I read a similar situation that occurred in India. The most popular monstrous projections of Revelation's devil onto Indian divinity was that of the god of Calicut, first described in the Itinerario in 1950 by the Indian traveler Lodovico di Vathema. Many Europeans came to epitomize India's theological imagination and its indigenous religious practice as diabolically monstrous, using Vatthema's god of Calicut as a reference point. His host, the king of Calicut, shows him a small chapel in his home, and the result is Vatthema's description of the king's god as a king of satanic anti-pope surrounded by other devilish figures, and a combination of different creatures in one amalgamation. We can see the detailed description in the pages 143 to 146 of Beal's book. He further calls the king a pagan who worships the devil.
So much for gratitude after a hospitable welcome.
Exactly. The subsequent woodcut illustration by George Brew again represents the scene as a kind of anti-max. The horned dragon wearing a papal tiara eats his meal of damned souls, while a robed figure wafts incense with a censer. This illustration combines familiar European visual images of Christian worship with apocalyptic images of hell and the Last Judgment.
And this presents such an unholy mix of religious familiarity and religious otherness.
No kidding. I concur with Audrey that it is impossible to know for sure that that was what there was in the chapel of Vatthema's host. That's because what he described is not so much Indian as it is biblical. What he saw, in parentheses, was his own projection of a devil monster of Revelation. Despite this possible blunder, nevertheless, subsequent narratives often appropriate Vatthema's devil of Calicut as they amplified the biblical apocalyptic sense of the scene, and by the turn of the 17th century, a fairly standard European representation of Indian religion as worship of the apocalyptic devil monsters of Revelation, casting adherents as masses hopelessly deceived by Satan and his beasts.
Why would there be a need to continue propagating this if it was not towards a particular end despite its subjective interpretations?
Well, ignoring the rich diversity of India and, for that matter, other societies' religious visual cultures in place of European traditions and biblical interpretations are common to colonial discourse. By projecting one's own familiar images of monstrous evil onto an unfamiliar religious visual culture, reducing unique and irreducible difference to one's own system of meaning by making monsters of other people's gods. Subsequently, seeking to create an image of familiar otherness that literally orients Western Christian identity against it.
You're right, Dorcas. But it wasn't just this lone devil. Some Christians began to mourn that millions of false gods existed in India, and the amount of lives there had been deceived into what the reading calls the pandemonium of beasts and devils. And there are claims that these demonic beings are making their way into the West and creating a quote-unquote new world order. And what the reading suggests is that yoga is one of these gateways into worshipping Satan or his beasts. And a good amount of individuals see yoga as demonic, and that if you sign up for a yoga class, then you are signing up for a little demon class. And these warnings exist because there is the idea that participating in other religions' meditative practices makes one unwittingly possessed by the quote-unquote kingdom of darkness. And that once you bring these practices into your life, you are now inviting demonic entities into your home and families. I'm familiar with these kinds of accusations because they've been around for a decent while. Some of the more recent ones would be the association with marijuana as the devil's lettuce, as many religious leaders claim that this drug is sinful and demonic, and as its name suggests, it's a temptation by the devil. I am also aware that in the past, perhaps around like the early 2000s, that many kids shows or games were labeled as demonic, such as Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And there was this idea that kids were harboring demons within their pockets. And we can go even further before this with the association that rock music was also the music of the devil. Because back when vinyl records were around, you could apparently play them backwards and hear a secret message within the song that was in praise of Satan. And the point of the reading is that it wants us to tell us there is a slippery slope from salvation and the kingdom of darkness, and that these non Christian forms of consumption are looking to weaken one's faith. Although I would argue that some of these are a little dubious to me.
Heman, I know just what you mean about the little demon class. Beal finishes this chapter by telling a story about a Christian woman named Karina who taught yoga. She dismissed the idea that there was anything wrong in it until a pastor supposedly cast out a demon of Oriental medicine, as she put it. At that point, she began to think she might be possessed by a Hindu spirit or demon as well. So she prayed, asking God to reveal the truth to her. Sure enough, she had a nightmare in which her gym had a spirit that lived there. Her home office had burning incense in it, and her backyard had huge, quote unquote, huge inflatable phosphorescent altar to Hindu deities, unquote. Convinced that she'd been given proof, she confronted her demon in the mirror. At first, it claimed to follow Jesus, but then it confessed to lying to unsuspecting Christians who thought they were innocently practicing yoga as an exercise routine. In Beal's opinion, this kind of thinking is another way to other religious practices of different cultures and essentially justify violence and exploitation of those cultures. It's pathetic, if you ask me, and it shows both arrogance and ignorance on the part of those who seek to demonize others' opinions and practices, whatever they may be.
Yeah, Nicole, you said it. And I'm really curious to hear the next group conversation about heaven in the garage, and I wonder how that will relate to the book of Revelation.
There's no telling. We'll just have to wait and see.
Well, goodbye for now, everyone. We hope you are all energized after the break, and may you be blessed this week.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye from us.